But sorry, let me just stop there. How do we think about that storytelling effort with another goal and where it intersects with the goal of doing no harm, especially where harm has already occurred while we're trying to do that good engagement? So, like any good story, I started on this quest to learn from others in the storytelling space and to ask them to kindly identify and share their insights and resources to bring into our practice. And so this is where we have our panel today. These are three really exceptional storytelling practitioners in different spheres of storytelling, different settings where that storytelling is happening. So we can do something of our own about the insights they have around storytelling structures, storytelling ethics, storytelling resources that we might, as a practice, want to be bringing into our practice to be ever more kind of considerate about how we bring those stories into the decision that we're trying to help people make. So here's our panelists today. We've got from academia, we've got a storyteller and former jurisdictional storyteller, and we've got a museum representative from a museum. So from academia, Vickie Larsen is Morningside University's Esther Mackintosh Scholar of the Humanities, and Vickie's based in Iowa. We have storyteller and former jurisdictional storyteller, Rowena Alegria. She's a storyteller practitioner and the city of Denver's former chief storyteller. She's based in Colorado. And we have representing the museum side of things, Frankie Abbott. She is the Levine Museum of the New South storytelling lead as its chief content strategist. And Frankie is joining us from North Carolina. So thank you, all of you, for being here today. Thank you to our three panelists for all the work you've been doing and for the insights that you're able to share with us today as a public participation community that wants to use storytelling wisely and carefully to make sure we're doing all we can do on that front. So a couple steps for this session. We're going to do a quick poll to check in with you about where you are with your storytelling and your P2 practice. And Shyla's going to do a quick poll with us on that in just a sec. We're then going to dedicate the bulk of our time to our panelists to hear from them. We've dedicated 10 minutes per panelist and then a 10-minute Q&A at the end. And they will be happy to entertain any questions that come about. And then we're going to do a final check-in about what you heard today that you can bring into your practice, wisdom that Rowena and Vickie and Frankie have been kind enough to share with us. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and ask Shyla if you could bring up our first check-in poll so we can understand a bit about where storytelling fits in your universe and in your practice.
Yeah, of course. I'm going to open the poll here. I just want to apologize for all the pinging. I think everybody can hear that of people coming in, entering the room. So I want to apologize for that. And then just also want to make sure everybody kind of stays on mute until it's asked if for you to come off of mute. With that, I will go ahead and open the poll.
So we're asking, where are you with your storytelling practice? And there's 4 options here. One is I'm doing some storytelling in my engagement practice. I consider myself an expert at storytelling in my practice. I'm planning to use storytelling for the first time soon. And I'm just interested in the topic of storytelling. I wanted to get a read about where that as a community on this website, on this webinar. So we've got almost everybody participating. We've got just a few more. If you haven't participated, just give you another, I don't know, 10, 15 seconds here to see if we can get your participation. Okay. All right, almost everybody voted. So let's look at where we landed here. Looks like I'm doing some storytelling in my engagement practice. Got the most votes at 41%. That's excellent and really happy that you can draw on your own experience then as we talk through what some of these other insights are from people in other storytelling spheres and kind of the partnerships and resources and consider made. We've got just a few folks who consider themselves expert at storytelling. So thank you for being here today and thinking through expertise in light of some of the information that will be shared with panelists. And then planning to use storytelling for the first time soon. So that's wonderful. That's got its own kind of considerations when you're doing something for the first time. We've all been there. We hope that this helps you with that first time work that you're doing. And then about a third of you are saying you're just interested in the topic. So thank you too for being here and providing yourself some more access to information before you get, dive in to any storytelling of your own. So with that, I'd like to pass it to our first panelist, and that's Vickie Larsen over in Iowa, who's joining us today from the academic space. So Vickie, can I pass it to you?
You can. Thank you very much. Thank you for that introduction. I'm in Iowa, and I'm a professor of originally English, but now I work in the public humanities sphere where I engage in community-based storytelling projects, always in collaboration with community partners and residents. They're almost always a local kind of project. I started that work at the University of Michigan, and then was brought to Iowa to do this work here in the middle of the Great Plains, which is fantastic. So for academics, storytelling is a form of research, and it comes with a set of prescribed methods and ethical standards. Let me share my screen here so you can see some nice pictures. Can you see that? No, not yet. How about that?
No.
Better? So it comes with prescribed methods and ethical standards that we're professionally accountable for. The methods protect the narrators that we work with and the stories that they tell from potential misuse. In other words, we do tend to talk every part of the process to death, but we're very careful once the process gets going, before, during, and after. In this photo, you see my current team here at Morningside. We're meeting at a downtown coffee shop in July. We've got faculty from musicology, theater, Spanish, English, computer science, and political science. And we're developing a new storytelling project called At Home in Siouxland. And the table, you see that we've read the book Wisdom Sits in Places by anthropologist Keith Basso. That's a book about the role of place and story in Apache culture. So we're very thoughtful about the process and how it sort of becomes part of larger cultural practices.
I
So
don't
the
know that we
first,
are, because I'm not sure that I
oops,
agree.
someone needs to mute. Sorry. Thank you. Someone took the talk away. I thought you had comment. So the first step in our process is always to determine what the goals are in a storytelling initiative and what role these stories are going to play now and in the future. And then to determine what kind of storytelling best meets those goals. So I'm going to outline three of the types of storytelling that we sort of differentiate between different forms of the storytelling practice. And the first is storytelling as a form of active public engagement. It occurs in real time. So these are community building activities that occur as experiences. And the goal of these experiences is that people are going to share their stories with listeners who are present, sometimes with partners, sometimes in story circles, sometimes with large audiences. It's not about recordings. It's not about documenting these stories. These are moments are meant to work as a process that helps participants and narrators, listeners and storytellers are changed by the experience itself. So sometimes these can be like sort of staged as a public relations kind of event, but they very often do change the people that participate in them, and they can shape a project because relationships are built as people are engaged in this sort of practice. So these are part of like something that's happening as an activity. The second form is a kind of journalism. So journalism projects seek to raise the profile of the lived experiences of narrators. The stories are recorded, usually as content for some kind of publication in a website or an article, a documentary film, a report, museum exhibits, or promotional materials for some kind of activity. So, this is actually, this photo in here is a still shot from a project, a journalism type project that you're going to hear about Rowena Alegria is going to talk about after this, coming out of the Office of Storytelling from Denver. So these projects are raising the profile of a story of a population, but they're not meant to maintain the data and the stories for the long term. They're going to be the project's going to happen now, or in the very near future. The long term comes in when storytelling becomes oral history. So the third form is oral history. This is a research method, and it's conducted by trained oral historians, and their goal is to supplement the existing documentary record of a historical phenomenon, which could have happened yesterday. It doesn't need to be distant past, but it could be what's happening like right now. And so we're seeking to expand the documentary record with personal testimony, memory accounts, and eyewitnesses, because memory is a very interesting way of looking at how events happened, how they continue to become part of the stories of the lives of the people who witnessed them, and how they are portrayed in memory, and how what kind of tricks memory plays. Not that they're negative, not, I don't mean to say that memories are false. Memories are fascinating ways to think about how things played out in the long term for people. So these stories tend to focus on specific historical events. They are professionally recorded, they're transcribed, and they're archived for broad and permanent use. So that's one of the methods, one of the things that differentiates this method of storytelling from the previous two, which is that these stories tend to be deposited in a permanent digital archive so that narrators' memory stands as a permanent part of the public record. And these collections are often housed and maintained in libraries. So there's a few examples that I want to show you. This one, for instance, this is the Library of Congress houses one of America's oldest story collections. So this is the collection of a famous old collection of slave narratives. It was collected by the Federal Writers Project under the U.S. Works Progress Administration in the late 30s. So I'll drop a link in the chat to these things after I finish the slides. I can't see the chat anymore because the slideshow's taken over. But there are 2,300 personal accounts, firsthand accounts of enslavement. There's all these photos, documents, transcriptions of interviews, and then and this is in the Library of Congress. And so that's one of the earliest sort of like storytelling initiatives, widespread, big storytelling initiative, important in the history of America. An adjacent collection is held at the American Folklife Center, and this is called Voices Remembering Slavery. This is actually an audio recording collection. So they've got a whole bunch of audio recordings of the voices of people who had been enslaved. So you can hear their voices as they describe what it was like the day the Union Army came through the place where they were enslaved. And so their voices were captured throughout the 20th century, early 20th century. And you can go to the Voices Remembered Slavery and you can listen online. There's a streaming platform at the Library of Congress to be able to listen to the voices of people who had been enslaved. And it's absolutely like remarkable to listen to these kinds of stories that have been permanently archived and maintained. Somebody at the very beginning designed these storytelling efforts not as like an experience to happen for the people who were present, or as a sort of like opportunity to generate content for something that was going to happen at that time, but for the permanent record. And so we have these, and we can still listen to these stories, and we still have them. So academics work across all three of these types of storytelling projects: the engagement activity, the journalistic project, and then the oral history. And so we just have to know which one really suits the purpose that we're working with in order to determine what kinds of like protocols we need to follow in order to do the project right. So, and to think about how to design the thing. So I've worked across all three, and these are some parts of a project I worked on when I was in Michigan, the Flint Neighborhood Oral History Project. So we worked with residents and community partner organizations to create a history of a neighborhood. We held story circles for engagement. We conducted interviews that we used for a documentary film, and then we developed an archive of documents, artifacts, and oral histories for a permanent record. So we were kind of working across all three. of those. Different partners had different goals. And so we had to kind of like move across those boundaries pretty carefully. Academics have a lot to offer to these processes, and we also come with a little bit of baggage. So because storytelling is wrapped in a large, complex research project, there's a lot of moving parts for us. We always create a project team, and then we develop this project together as a team. Usually the team includes other academics with different disciplines and different expertises. And then also public and community agencies. We have people from nonprofits. We have artists of various kinds and resident groups and individual residents. These teams often contain some kind of community-based professional story circle expert like Rowena Alegria, who's going to talk to you. And often they contain people from local museums like Frankie Abbott, who you're going to hear from third. So they become part of this team. We develop a knowledge base. We do our homework. So the academics in this game do all the research into the existing knowledge and scholarship that has been produced about this phenomenon, so that we have all this large context. We've done all the reading, and we've dug into all the existing archives, so that when we come into the conversation, we don't need to be educated by the storyteller. We're two people who know this, who know what happened, and then we just know about it differently, and we're both passionate about it in the engagement. It makes the storytelling, really fascinating. So we develop these methods and protocols for the work in accordance to research fields. We have our institutions give us oversight, and we have professional organizations that have developed all of these protocols that we have to follow. Our universities have institutional review boards, and these are these sort of monstrous things that are amazing and wonderful and necessary. They hold us to professional standards, but about things like human subjects. How do you protect human subjects? How do you protect your narrators? And how do you think about the kind of harm you can do in storytelling? And then we consider privacy issues. We secure informed consent properly, and we develop intellectual property rights understandings and data sharing agreements, because there's going to be data and there's going to be intellectual property. And then we have to answer the question of who owns it. And this question comes up all the time, by the way. It sounds, like maybe you're hoping it won't, because I was, but I know I was hoping it wouldn't, but it does. The intellectual property rights, whenever I start a project, I set it in writing that the intellectual property rights over cultural heritage data, over the stories, lies with the storyteller first. And second, with the person whose intellectual property created the product. So like whoever was like orchestrating the interview or recording and documenting and like creating the technical part of it. So, but the storyteller maintains intellectual property over the story, and therefore can always control where and when that story and how that story is used. This has come into conflict a number of times with community partners who wish to use the stories without consulting with the storyteller in different ways, or who even wish to, dare I say, sell them to other people who are doing projects and wish to just have the story, that's already been collected, and the storyteller has lost control of how their story is being used and even profited from. So those intellectual property discussions are kind of an important part of why we spend a lot of time when we do this stuff. Academics always bring professional expertise. We bring technical expertise. We have great recording equipment and digital scanners and cameras and all the stuff, and we know how to use them. Our goal is to produce archive quality data files that will remain stable over long periods of time. So the projects always produce terabytes of data, mostly audio, video, images, and document files. So these grow bigger than you can ever imagine. Right now, I'm working with a group that we were just starting with a small box of junk, like here's our stuff. Maybe we can make a story out of it. It's grown 5,000 digital files. I'm not even exaggerating. So like these grow because people start to show up and bring their stuff when they see that you're building something. So we have massive metadata spreadsheets, digital archives, databases that we've constructed, web platforms, there's all this sort of digital part of it. And some of that includes how do we maintain and manage this data for the long term? How do we have security plans for this data? Because we don't want to lose it. These stories matter a lot. And so usually this level of work in oral history goes with stories that are going to matter long term. So I think that, for instance, some of the work I've done has to do with the aftermath of urban renewal. And I think that the aftermath of urban renewal is historically significant, and therefore those stories will matter long term and need to be archived carefully and not just used right now, because I do think that's going to matter as we look back on how cities were changed by that initiative in particular. But I am an English major, so a lot of this stuff is I've got a crackerjack team of people, information scientists and programmers and computer scientists who help out. So the collaboration is essential because I work with story narrative, and the team takes on some of the other stuff. So as you might imagine, academics bring a fair amount of complication. One of that is time. Our projects take a long time, and we are invested in them, and we like take years invested in these projects, and our community partners are almost always looking for a more agile project. So sometimes we have to have conversations with community partners about moving in and moving out of the project in a way that works for their time frame, because they're often not in it for 5 or 10 years. And so finding existing projects that academics are working on and engaging with them, moving in and moving out of them is a better plan for most of our partners than trying to partner from the beginning to the end because of the time frame. And we also bring in a complication. Yes, ma'am?
Vickie, I'm just letting you know we're about 15 minutes in, and so
Oh my gosh.
yeah, I know time
Okay,
goes
let me finish up.
Yeah.
Okay, another problem that we have is the research imperative. We don't let people cherry pick the data for promotional purposes. All of it matters. So that can be a problem. The upside is we often bring our own funding. So we secure grant funding, usually for us and all of our partners, and support the funding of the project from foundations and government agencies. So I'm going to drop some links in the chat when I stop the sharing. To some of the projects I'd like you to take a look at, the kinds of things that come out of academic circles, the kinds of combination of research and art that emerges with these things. And you can take a look at them on your own, and also a couple of organizations that can provide more training for people and more contacts for people who are interested in meeting up with oral historians or storytelling experts in their local academic spaces. Thank you.
Wonderful. Okay, so now we'll pass it to Rowena.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for being here. Let me pull up my presentation. I had some technical difficulties to start, so apologies in advance. I'll have to hop in and then hop out. But there, can you see that?
It's giving us so far a black box. We can see your slides on the left, but the main slide is black on my end. Maybe you want to advance one and see if it
Oh,
goes.
is it a video? That might be why. Is the first slide a video?
No.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Well,
You want to try again? I mean, we've all been in this spot where technology in one moment works and then it doesn't. So we can take a little bit of patience here. And
okay. Sorry about that.
That's okay. You're getting a heart from Kaylee at the County of San Diego. We've all been there. We could probably take a look at that of how many of us have tested the equipment and tested it twice and then gotten to the
right, and then it still doesn't work. And for some reason, I am so sorry.
That's all right.
All right, let me try again. Well, and now that's weird.
There you go.
Is that working?
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah.
All right. Hallelujah. Can you still see it?
Yeah. So it's just to do a time check. It's 29 past the hour. If we could go to 39, and then we'll pass it to Frankie for the last 10 and do a quick Q&A and check.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Let me set my timer so that I don't go over. All right. So, thank you so much, Vickie. That was terrific. I want to be you when I grow up. To have access to all of that is just, it's phenomenal. I come from journalism, and then I was appointed by the mayor to be his communications director. And then I moved into the Agency for Human Rights and Community Partnerships and started doing, while we were continuing to do storytelling, but really moving in more of a narrative justice position, which was an evolution. But let me, I don't want to get ahead of myself. Let me start from the beginning. Chief storytellers were kind of a big deal for a while, with Detroit, Atlanta, and Denver sort of leading the way. Detroit was the first, and they really set up good news for the city of Detroit. Poor Detroit couldn't buy a positive headline, so they decided to create their own, and they're still doing that today. Different chief storyteller, I don't even know if they still have that role, but they still do the neighborhoods of Detroit and telling those stories. Atlanta took a different approach. They don't have a chief storyteller, but they really are telling stories from the city's perspective. Detroit was trying to do neighborhood perspective, or is doing neighborhood perspective. Atlanta is doing from the city perspective, but trying to make it, more readable. And let's be honest, writing the stories that they just can't get media to interpret in the way they would like them to be interpreted, in a resident friendly and, of course, mayor friendly perspective. They're meeting some challenges that municipalities face, governments face. Bringing positive stories to light in this media environment is just really difficult. Connecting residents with resources that, especially if they already exist and they're not, just new so that they're newsworthy, it's really hard to get anybody to pay attention to those. And then, like I was just talking about, creating resident-friendly content. It can be hard unless you're doing it yourself. And all of those are very valid reasons to do storytelling. We had an entirely different perspective in Denver, or I did at least. You guys might appreciate this story. As the mayor's chief communications and community affairs officer, I was in, I kid you not, probably 100 different meetings where somebody asked, why don't they listen to us? Particularly when it came to marginalized communities. And finally, out of frustration, I said, what would happen if we listened? And that was sort of where the Office of Storytelling was born. And now this is where I have to reshare. And so apologies in advance, but I want to give you an example of the work that we do. So let me reshare. I hate Zoom. There it is. Okay. Can y'all see that?
Yes, we can.
Okay, here we go.
getting lots of love hearts and love bubbles and love things going there, Rowena. Yeah.
Yay, thank you so much. I appreciate that. Okay, now let me go back to the screen. And I mean, as you can see, right, our focus was really to provide a platform for residents who don't, uh-oh, stop it. Divided time for sure. Let's see, okay. Can you see that again? Oh.
You got the black screen again, but maybe if you could go to the next slide, slide 7, it looks like, if you go to that.
So you're not seeing the 5-year summary?
That's the
No.
next slide you have to click on. Slide
Yeah,
7.
we on your side, but not in the main screen.
Okay. Somehow I have 2 of these up, I think. I don't know how that's working. Arg. I just don't have time for this. Okay.
Almost there.
Well, and it won't let me exit out of it. I don't know what the issue is. It's very frustrating.
Are you able to just speak to the slide? Do you need the slide? Maybe we could just hear you talk about it.
Okay, well, let me. That's a good idea.
Yeah, it's
I'm
okay.
sorry, so frustrating. Where am I? Okay, so I really wanted to share what we accomplished in just 5 years, providing a platform to residents to share their stories. Because while folks like Vickie and, you know, coming up, Frankie, create these archives, so often those archives are accessible to the academics, accessible to the researchers, but so much of particularly our marginalized communities don't have access to those or don't know how to access those. They may, you know, be able to participate in an event or whatever, but the, you know, being part of that is missing. So we really tried to create the events and to meet people where they were. I mean, let's be honest, everybody's watching video right now. And so we wanted to be there for them and provide them these stories in a way that they could access. And what I wanted to show you and what Vickie showed you is probably my favorite example of the kinds of relationships we were able to build in community. And that was the Reclaiming Denver's Chinatown, which, I mean, I was born and raised in this city, and I had no idea that Denver ever had a Chinatown. But because there wasn't a marker in sight, the place was nearly burned down in an anti-Chinese race riot in 1880. And then what remained was completely demolished by urban renewal in the mid-20th century. And the only reason I knew about it was because a couple of descendants from Denver's original Chinese communities came to us and said, "We think our story's being forgotten. Will you help us?" And while that sounds like a pretty specific and small percentage of today's Denverites, the film really proved the power of storytelling for outreach and engagement, but also for so much more. Over about 18 months, that film was screened and discussed across the state 18 times. And when I say discussed, I mean we watched the hour-long film together with more than 1,200 people across the state and talked about the issues brought up in the film, which include racism, redlining, access, plus, and this is vitally important, the contributions made by that community to the creation not only of our city, but to the Transcontinental Railroad that connected the country east to west. And we talked about the individual triumphs of the residents. And that film sold out 2 film festival screenings. More than 15,000 people watched it on local broadcast stations. It was shown more than 50 times on the city's broadcast channel, had more than 9,200 viewers on the city's YouTube channel, which is 2,000 more than the last time I checked, even though the Office of Storytelling has been closed a year now. The webpage was the biggest drawer of audience in the agency, and the film is used in classrooms all over, including Cal Berkeley, which I know because a professor there asked me. I have so much more that I would love to talk to you guys about, including the permanence of the project, the value of context, what, really is narrative justice. But I'm going to turn it over to Frankie now and let her talk to you about the museum perspective. Thank you so much. And again, sorry for the technical difficulties.
All right, Frankie.
Rowena, you got all the hearts, so don't you feel bad about that. Clearly, people loved what you shared. And I'm going to try to share my screen, although I feel a little scared. We're cursed. No, it's fine. Just to make sure, can everybody see my screen share? All right. Well, you've already heard that I'm Frankie Abbott, and I work at Levine Museum of the New South, which is a museum in Charlotte, North Carolina, that does work both in that city and on the regional level across the South. So I'm going to talk a little bit about museum perspective, as Rowena said. Don't worry, I'm not getting too far out in level, but just to level set and remind and position myself in the conversation, there are obviously many kinds of museums. I am a practitioner at a history museum, but I would say in general, museums share a sort of common goal of community engagement and work with the sort of geographic place in which they exist, whether they are an art museum, a natural history museum, a science museum, and then there's so many more, and also wanting to underscore that there are museums of many sizes. Teeny tiny historic house museums, sort of very, very large and well-funded art museums, and kind of everything in between and in the mix. And storytelling itself as a broad concept really lies at the core of what museums understand themselves to do. I would say that most museums are really focused on storytelling and dialogue as the two prongs of what they're doing, particularly history museums. And they incorporate the kind of storytelling that we're focusing on here in work with exhibitions, in public programs, which both Vickie and Rowena have spoken about, where storytelling occurs. You see museums also venturing some into digital projects, so using storytelling content and partnership with storytellers to develop walking tour apps of neighborhoods, for example, on the digital front. And then, of course, in collections. And so when museums are doing storytelling projects, they are also collecting along some of the same lines that Vickie talked about, oral histories and sometimes more informal interviews, a little less in the technical oral history lane, things into their own collections. And of course, are also doing storytelling with items that they've collected from the community as well as stories. In these photos, there's just an example of an exhibition we did about incarceration, and then some community photos that the museum collected in a project about a neighborhood in Charlotte called Greer Heights, which I will talk about a little bit in a second. So in terms of the way that museums organize their projects that focus on storytelling, they do that with many, many partners. You've heard from two kinds of those partners today already. Academics collaborate often with museums, as well as city entities, including storytelling entities where they exist. Although in Charlotte specifically, I actually don't think we've had a chief storyteller, although I would have loved to have applied for that job had it been available. Also very common for museums to work either in specific projects or as part of a broad strategy with a group of community advisors who are helping them to sort of set direction and select projects. And then also working with community storytellers through various stages of project development, from ideation to planning, to the actual collection of interviews with a maybe broader group, to review of kind of content and design, and then presentation of the stories, again, whether that's through a program or something that looks a little bit more like an exhibition. I want to call attention to the work of actually a museum that I do not work at, although I would be very excited to work at this museum, which is the Wing Luke Museum. I don't know if folks have heard of it in Seattle. They focus on art and history related to Asian Americans, Native Hawaiians, and Pacific Islanders. And they have an amazing model for community-developed, community-based work. So they actually accept exhibition proposals from the public. They have a strong, consistent community advisory committee that works through all kinds of things. And they've developed a million through this model exhibitions that are really amazing and community driven and include a lot of storytelling. This is just one example from Wing Luke, which is an exhibition that they developed, I think, on a pretty fast timeline, like lots of things that happened during COVID, called Community Spread: How We Faced the Pandemic, which involved a lot of storytelling. And then, of course, I want to show you an example of Levine Museum of the New South Cirque as well. This is a humble exhibition that we did with an amazing group of folks from a community improvement organization in a neighborhood called Greer Heights. Greer Heights in Charlotte had just this terrific history of Black entrepreneurship. It was a community that had been founded by one previously enslaved, very successful African American farmer who had acquired a bunch of land and then had sold it to other Black farmers and developed a community called Greer Heights, which had a long and exciting history. We were, excuse me, connected to some folks in that community and decided to reach out to them, and they worked with us on the project through many phases. You can see a little example of really, it's a montage reel of storytellers talking about Arthur Greer, for whom the neighborhood is named. But also what we developed with them was a traveling exhibition. I will say that Greer Heights had been over decades pretty pummeled in the media for crime stories and other kinds of things that sort of emphasized, unflattering things about the neighborhood and sometimes exaggerated things about what was going on in Greer Heights. It was a really insular and exciting community, and they were eager to get a different narrative out about the sort of history of the place in which they lived and thrived with their families. And so we developed Greer Heights Community as Family, and they helped us select all the places for the exhibition to travel as well, which was kind of exciting, both in their community on show and then outside in the city. And then they helped also with programming related to the exhibition. That really at the center, they helped us develop that programming and deliver it. So what are some of the opportunities in collaborating with museums? Well, there's a lot of discussion about this in museums, but I will say research shows that museums generally hold on to a pretty high level of public trust. So people think of museums as delivering fact-based information. And the public, again, sort of generally fairly trusting of museums and their broader storytelling work. Museums, I would say, especially in the last decade, have really taken a turn to focus more and more on community than they ever did. So I think you would find museums excited partners in sort of a community-driven storytelling venture. As I already mentioned, they have a network of existing partnerships. Museums can offer space. I'm just going to leave that hanging out there because space for whatever sorts of presentation, program, exhibition, like whatever kind of framework for the storytelling they develop. They also are big on dialogue, as I mentioned, which is great because most of us want storytelling to be its own exciting project, but also a vehicle for folks to interact with one another and talk about what they learn, what their personal experience is, and make connections. And finally, folks in museums, some of them at the core of teams like mine, have a fair amount of experience with storytelling. They are not the only ones with experience with storytelling, but they can bring some perspectives and skills related to that to the table. Complications with working with museums. Obviously, museums have a complicated history around collecting, particularly depending on the kind of institution they are. So that's like my asterisk next to public trust. Museums have obviously been involved in the important work of returning things that they should not have had and collected. I would also say that part of the turn towards being more community-centered is happening at different paces at different institutions, and museums, of course, have been places that have had a little bit of a chokehold for a long time on narrative authority on storytelling. And so this turn in the last decade is really, really important towards doing community-driven work in that vein. But, the classic model of the curator is sort of that they tell you the story and impart it to the visitor. And so that is the moment of change for museums in a positive direction. Unlike Vickie, we do not always come with funding to make projects happen, although sometimes that happens. But I do get a lot of requests for projects with the assumption that museum sort of has a big pot of money to do things like this, and that's not necessarily true. And then maybe also, like Vickie said, the timeline on which we do things can be a little slower. I know I read on Wing Luke's website for their submit a proposal that they estimate 4 to 5 years for a project from the submission of a proposal to when it comes out. And so while Greer Heights, for example, took us a year, and I think there are some sort of faster moving avenues for projects depending on their size and what you want sort of to get out of them and what the storytellers want to get out of them, that can be a holdup. Museums have a lot of documents about ethics that are worth examining if you're interested in partnering with museums. Some of them have broad information about sort of ethics in the profession, but they do also have information about ethics related to collections. as well as work within community. I highlighted the work of two big giant organizations on this slide, the American Alliance of Museums and the International Council of Museums. But also individual museums tend to have statements, codes of ethics of their own. So if you're interested in partnering, that would be something to look at. And also just to share this sort of in conclusion, the International Council of Museums adopted this new statement, which is really an exciting revolution in museums defining what they think they do. And I just want to draw to your attention the words ethically, professionally, and with the participation of communities. So again, just to reinforce, that's kind of at the core of what museums are doing in the here and now. And then some resources, the websites of those two organizations, Voice of Witness, which has useful information about storytelling, honesty, transparency. Vickie already mentioned the National Council for Public History. And then again, local museums in your own space, I imagine, have sort of resources to consider if you are looking for museum partners.
Wonderful. Wonderful, Frankie. Thank you three for the wealth of information that you provided and kind of the examples that you're providing around different types of story structures, different types of approaches to that storytelling, different types of ethical thoughts around whose story is it and who's getting to tell the story, different ways to use the space that you're in, and to partner with the space, and some considerations with that. Just wanting to open it up maybe for 5 or 6 minutes here to any kind of Q&A that we might be able to have with each other while we have the benefit of each other's presence. Are there any questions that are percolating up for anybody on this topic? Folks, it's that. I know, Frankie, you mentioned, the museums shifting to who's telling the story, right? And Vickie, you mentioned at the beginning about who owns the story, and kind of the shared story concept. And I know as practitioners, Rowena, in your work, and definitely in the P2 space, we're asking for people's stories all the time, and we're not getting signed consent or anything of that nature. We're talking to them about what's happened for you here, what is happening for you here. How would it be if this particular project occurred for you? I'm just wondering if you could talk a little bit more about that kind of ownership piece, the IP of having a story from the community's point of view. If there's any thoughts there that you could share with us before we close out the session.
Well, I think what Vickie said is really, really important. We also have had situations. I think we have good agreements with the storytellers themselves. They, of course, get copies of things. They sign a fairly elaborate form about what we can do with it, giving them the option to sort of discontinue our ability to preserve that for various reasons if they would like to do that, and also being very explicit about they can elect, for example, to have us share a copy with another archive in the city of Charlotte for free if they want us to do that. But we definitely have had people come and want to pull a quote from a quote they found on YouTube and use it we had one that went up on a monument in Charlotte and it was not the correct quote and nobody ever asked the permission of the storyteller. So all of that stuff is really, really important, and it can particularly when something is a clip on a site like YouTube, it can really take on a life of its own outside of permission. So that can be dangerous.
Yeah, thank you for that. Vickie or Rowena, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
I know that a lot of academics in this space, and I want to recommend people go to that one link I gave to the Visiting Room Project. It's one of the best projects out there. It's a public facing project where they've collected these stories, but they've gone to great lengths to sort of protect most of the story, have some of the story available, store them on a secure server. Like they're really working to try to put these protections in place because these problems always occur after the fact. And then you're like dealing with a kind of mess and a sort of bunch of community anger because you either lost stories, you ignored stories that already existed, or or you allowed someone's story to get out there in some way. So I do think that at least in the communities I've worked in, the community members are very, very cognizant of intellectual property rights, and they want to have that conversation before their story about who's going to own this and who's going to control it and how's it going to be used.
Great, wonderful. Rowena, is there anything you'd like to add, or is that?
I think I would just like to add the perspective of what we did, in that we did get permission to use the stories and put people's stuff out there. I think where we were different, and what I didn't really get to talk about with Chinatown, is we gave the work to a partner group, and they have run with that and used the film to help them create murals to get support in the local, to finally be recognized in History Colorado, which is the state's historical archive, for the first time, in part thanks to our film. The official state archive actually recognized Colorado's Chinese community. In 150 years, they had never done that. And so by creating the work that we did and sending that out, we have allowed community to own their own story and go out and build on that. As far as, is there evidence to indicate storytelling is a more impactful approach? I wish I had been able to share a slide of what we accomplished in just 5 years at the Office of Storytelling. We engaged with 500,000 people. We had views of our films in, the tens of thousands. We were in community, and I mean, it just sort of became a joke with my team that we always made people cry because they weren't used to seeing themselves on film. They weren't used to seeing the stories told in their own voices and not interpreted by someone, or that we didn't use narrators, we didn't use voiceovers. It was just the storytellers themselves telling their stories, and the power of that was just kind of amazing. And what we were able to accomplish, and engaging people who were from all the marginalized communities was a little bit phenomenal. So I have lots of data, and I would love to talk to you, Samantha, and be able to answer that a little further.
Great. Thank you for sharing on that. We're just getting to the end of our time, and I see Akorfa, if I get your question right, in chat. You're actually leading us into the closing kind of check-in that I wanted to make, is to ask that people put in chat, what would you like to know more about in regard to storytelling? So Akorfa, if I've got your name right, you shared, it would be nice to be given an example of what it looks like in practice and public participation, not just the impact, but as the facilitator, how can one incorporate storytelling to foster engagement, build consensus, manage conflict, etc., or to achieve impact? How does one leverage storytelling to make business cases, to create systems change? As someone in the social services, social support space, I interact with community members frequently and hear their stories. Research and stats are good, but so are stories. So you're giving us a lot of ideas about what you would like to know more about. I don't think we have time right today to answer that question because we're down to our last minute of this webinar. I'd like, though, to invite others to please put in anything else you would like to know about in regard to storytelling, as we want to look at that and think about future webinars and ways to address those types of topics. So if you wouldn't mind, maybe just having a quiet reflection for 60 seconds or so, and populating the chat with anything you'd like to know more about, or where you see storytelling fitting in with your practice now based on today's discussion. So we'll just give some open space there, about 60 seconds. And then Shyla, I will pass it back to you after that.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. Thank you to our presenters today, Vickie, Rowena, Frankie, Kathy, and to everybody that joined. We really appreciate your participation. This webinar was recording, and will be sent out in a follow-up email to anybody that was registered. So if you had a colleague or somebody you know that registered for today's webinar but wasn't able to make it, we will send an email out with this recorded webinar in it. Kathy, Frankie, Rowena, Vickie, I'm happy to share, like, if you want to connect with participants on the webinar call today, or if anybody here has questions or wants to further connect with our presenters, please feel free to drop your email in the chat or send myself an email. My email I'll put in the chat, but you can also find it on all of the communications that went out regarding today's webinar call. So that's training@IAP2USA, and I'm happy to continue the learning and the growing and the connection of this call. So thank you.
Great. With that, I'd like to say thank you to everybody and thank you to our panelists today for the great, wonderful insights that you provide about the work you're doing. Thank you.
Thank you.
If you are still hanging on, do you have any last minute questions?
No, I'd just like to say hi to Carl. It's been a
Oh,
while.
okay. I didn't know. Carl looked definitely like he wanted to
Yeah.
talk to somebody.
Yeah, yeah, thank you. Thank you. It's been a long time, Kathy. We were on a Y board together,
Yeah,
and I'm now a full-time fiction writer. So yeah,
yeah,
I've written a couple of books.
that's
And
wonderful. Thanks
yeah,
for,
I've also made a free primer on storytelling
oh,
for
nice.
nonprofits and business, so I can send that to you. And I was just on
Yes, please.
nonprofit radio with Tony Martinelli that just came out yesterday.
Okay,
So we were
fantastic.
talking about storytelling. So, if I can help in any way, let me know.
That's fantastic, Carl. Thank you. I was so happy to see your name on the roster. I was like, oh, that's great. So yeah,
Yeah.
let's talk about that and coordinate on that.
Okay. So what's your email? Is your email the same, Kathy?
No, it's changed. I'll put it, I can't, it's just Kathy, CATHY at incommon, INCOMMON .online.
In INCOMMMON. What was the
On,
last part?
dot,
Online.
yeah,
Online. Okay.
yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I'm forever writing these things down wrong.
I know.
So
Yeah. Well, it's good to see
yeah.
you.
Yeah, yeah, and it was interesting. Colorado is so supportive of writers. I know a
Yeah.
number of authors there, and they just have contests and they have funding, and it's really good.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Yeah, wonderful. And thank you for all the you're hybridizing across these different spheres. So it's great.
Well, there are a lot of there are a lot of lessons you learn as a fiction writer that
Yeah.
you can use in storytelling anywhere.
Yeah.
So that, I
It's great.
think we can all be better storytellers, and I've made every mistake possible, but my books have won awards. So there you go.
Oh, all right. Well,
All right.
I'll
Well,
get,
thank you so much. That was interesting. I didn't know these organizations and how they structure how they go about getting stories and protecting intellectual property.
yeah, that was fast.
So
Yeah, really
yeah, yeah, yeah.
cool. Well, I look forward to setting up a separate time and catching up.
Okay, okay. Thanks, Shyla, as well.
Thank you.
All right. Bye
Bye.
now.
Kathy, are you all set, or did you want to?
Yeah, just check in. I wasn't sure if the other presenters could hang out for a bit, but it
Yeah,
looks like they have their
yeah.
other. So looks like we had about 86 people at one point,
Yeah, I think
87.
I saw a cap at like 90 was the most. So, like, right. Sorry. In the beginning, that was completely my fault. Somebody helped me out with turning off the dinging, the chiming, like when everybody was coming in. That was so distracting. And then I like couldn't figure it out because I was like, you know, that feeling of like, oh my gosh, what do I
Yeah,
I can't find the right button.
Yeah.
So somebody turned it off. I don't was if it was you, thank you. I don't know who it was.
It wasn't because I was sort of I was just talking and I
Yeah,
could hear it, but I didn't know what to do about it either. So
that was my
hopefully
fault. Lesson learned for moving into the next webinar.
everybody.
I need to turn that off. I finally found it because that was super distracting in the beginning, and I apologize to everybody.
Presenters, there's just a lot to say,
Yeah,
so yeah,
I know it's hard because it's a topic to
it's a
talk.
big talk.
Yeah.
That question that a Corfa asked here, I'm just going to take a screen grab of it because I think it's probably the topic for another webinar for next year. Is like give some examples about what storytelling looks like, public participation, and I think maybe we could probably design a webinar about that.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
I know webinars go so quick. It's just like
Yeah.
they always leave you like wanting more. So,
Okay. Well,
yeah.
from your point of view, did that feel okay? Good.
Yeah. Yeah, I felt like Rowena was a little nervous and I'm sorry if I wasn't helpful to her, so I just apologize for that. Um,
Fine. I just think she was having tech issues that she
yeah.
wasn't. Sounds like her computer crapped out and she was having to use another computer that she wasn't
Yeah.
comfortable. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but I thought everybody else, I mean, everybody did great across the board. Just time, time
Yeah.
it just goes so fast. So, but yeah, good information, good speakers. So thank you. Thank you for
Yeah.
helping organize all of this. Is great.
Hope to do more.
Yeah,
Okay.
for sure. So I'll be in touch with a follow-up email and all the things to close out this webinar. All right. All right. Thanks. Talk soon. Bye.